Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Connecticut's Old State House. My name is Rebecca Tabor-Conover. I'm head of public programs here, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another installment of the Conversations at Noon series. It's an exciting week for Hartford as we celebrate our city's rich heritage of culture, art, and innovation with Saturday's Envision Fest. And the Old State House will be one of many organizations participating in this festival, and there's going to be a lot of art, music, food, and fun, so definitely join us on Saturday. I wanted to just make sure before we got started that this is a very busy week here at the Old State House, along with Envision Fest. We will be offering a Thursday program, which is a special noontime tour called A Great Storm Swept Over Us, African American History at the Old State House, and you'll have a chance to view objects that relate to John Brown and the Amistad hearings, and they are on loan to us from the Connecticut Historical Society and the Amistad Center for Art and Culture. On Friday, please join us for our farmers market. We'll be having a free outdoor concert by Fiesta del Norte, and they are a lot of fun, and the weather looks like it's going to be good, so come out and enjoy that. And for today, I would like to just mention that after the program, you are invited to take a look at a wonderful exhibit called Wheels for All, which is on loan to us from the Connecticut Historical Society. Enjoy seeing that. Mr. Goddard will be selling copies of his book on Colonel Pope after the program as well. And last but not least, I would really like to thank our funder, Connecticut Humanities, who generously provided the funding to fund our Conversations at Noon program. And we appreciate their support of this program. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Diane Smith, who is the Senior Producer for Program Development at the Connecticut Network. Thank you.
So I should warn you that this is being taped to air on CTN, and after it airs a number of times, it will also be available to download on our website, which is ct-n.com, so you can see how it all went. This weekend, as Rebecca was saying, it's a very exciting weekend in Hartford, and this weekend you might say that Hartford becomes the cycling capital of the world, or at least of the nation, thanks to Envision Fest and the Connecticut Cycling Festival. As we're about to see, there could not be a more appropriate place. Hartford has quite a history with bikes and other forms of transportation. For instance, are any of you driving a hybrid car? Okay. Probably feel really trendy and like ahead of the curve, right? A little bit, okay. She doesn't want to admit it, but a little bit. Well, what if I told you that electric cars were being built right here in Hartford in 1896? It's pretty impressive. We all know the name of Henry Ford, of course, but how many of us remember the name of Albert Augustus Pope? Well, by the turn of the 20th century, Pope was the leading automaker in the U.S. But before Pope's Hartford factory started turning out electric and gasoline cars, Pope made this city an international leader in manufacturing bicycles. He was a Civil War veteran and a transportation pioneer who fell in love with the bicycle when he saw one at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876. And as our speaker is going to tell us, by the end of the 1880s, Pope's factory on Capitol Avenue, right near here, was turning out thousands of bikes a year. But this visionary recognized the future of transportation was perhaps not the bicycle, but motorized vehicles, and by 1899, he was producing almost half the automobiles made in America. So our guest speaker today is going to go a bit deeper into the history of this amazing businessman and entrepreneur. Steve Goddard covered Connecticut and Hartford politics and government for a decade at the Hartford Times. He has practiced law in Hartford now for more than 40 years, and he's written 3 books on planes, trains, and automobiles. Today he's going to talk about his book, Colonel Albert Pope and His American Dream Machines. Please welcome Steve Goddard.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca Tabor-Conover, for putting this whole thing together and for that marvelous introduction by Diane Smith. I couldn't have written it better myself. In fact, I did write it myself. Let's see. audiences have clamored for copies of my book during my talks so that they have something more interesting to peruse. So now, you may have known that the Envision Fest people had attempted to get Bill Moyers for this introduction, but then someone said, no, we've got to go higher than that. And so they, would Diane Smith agree? And she was kind enough to agree. So here we are. Now, we're going to, this is going to be about a 20-minute talk, and it will be interspersed with slides here. So I'm going to activate that. Why don't I do that now? I'm not leaving. I'll throw something in. I can show that. Okay. Albert Augustus Pope was born in 1843 to a wealthy lumbering merchant family in Boston who had come here in 1634 from Great Britain. And as wealthy and prosperous as his family were, Albert Pope cast that future aside early on because he had a passion to be his own boss. Some of you may have shared that. Newly breveted out of the Civil War at age 22 with the rank of colonel, he decided to manufacture high-wheeled bicycles, which were all the rage back in Britain. You see one on your screen here. You've probably seen these in museums, but they were all over the streets in around 1880. Even though the facts don't back it up, Pope decided to play the role of war hero. And for the rest of his career, he insisted that his employers all call him Colonel, 22-year-old man. Okay? But to achieve his goal, Pope knew that he would need two key things: skilled manpower and sophisticated tool and die equipment. After a thorough search of industrial sites throughout New England and up and down the Atlantic coast, he settled on Capitol Avenue in Hartford, which was, believe it or not, the Silicon Valley of its day, with numerous industries. There, Samuel Colt's skilled workmen had settled after Colt's untimely demise in 1862. And in 1878, he hired Colt's men and took over a wing of the Weed Sewing Machine Company. Oops. Oh. It's not good to have it upside down. There you go. That is a 17-acre triangular swath of land between Capitol Avenue and the railroad tracks to the north. And here's what the Weed Company made. Sewing machines, all the rage in those days. But the Weed Sewing Machine Company had become a victim of its own success. Sewing machines had transformed life in the same way a personal computer would a century later. But a homemaker didn't need a new sewing machine every year, and so the market soon became saturated. Pope gave his product the name Columbia, and within months was turning out high wheelers. And here is his, it's a little dim, sorry, his showroom on Capitol Avenue, where interested buyers would come through to take a look. And he sold them through franchises throughout America and ultimately the world. He boasted that he had franchises everywhere from St. Petersburg, Florida to St. Petersburg, Russia. In the early going, the Colonel had the market pretty much to himself. And by the early 1880s, he was selling 1 million bicycles a year and earned himself the title of the father of the American bicycle. Now, the fancy name for a high wheeler is a velocipede. Their front wheels, as you can see, are about 5 feet high. The back wheels about the diameter of a basketball. Tubular steel hadn't been invented yet, so the frame was solid cast iron and weighed 70 pounds. If you happened to fall from a high wheeler onto a rocky pavement and it fell on top of you, there was no 911 in those days, but you'd probably end up in the hospital. Since virtually nobody knew how to ride them, Pope set up schools that charged pupils 50 cents a lesson to, first of all, mount the beast, as you see this gentleman doing, and second, to hoist oneself onto the bicycle seat. Lessons were worth it to ride a contraption that cost $300 in a day when a worker's pay was $1 a day. Soon, a velocipede craze overtook America. In Hartford, a writer who lived a half mile from the Pope plant decided he'd like to give it a try. His pockets were bulging with cash from selling such books as Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, so that Mark Twain could well afford the purchase. And when he got home, he wrote about what riding a high wheeler was like. You hop along behind it on your right foot, resting the other on the mounting peg and grasping the tiller with your hands. At the word, you rise on the peg, stiffen your left leg, hang the other one around in the air in a general and indefinite way, lean your stomach up against the rear of the saddle, and then you fall off. Maybe on one side, maybe on the other, but you do fall off. You get up, brush yourself off, do it again, and once more, and then several times. Buy a bicycle, Mark Twain exhorted his readers. You will not regret it, if you live. The Colonel realized his main drawback was that nearly all roads in America were rutted dirt paths, with hardly any paved roads among them. So in 1880, Pope founded the League of American Wheelmen and established the Good Roads movement to persuade Congress to pave roads and link every county in America. Amazingly, the League of American Wheelmen still exists today with chapters all across America. We have any members of the League? For heaven's sakes, right here among us. And she doesn't look 130, I'll tell you. Colonel Pope proved as able a marketer as a manufacturer. Now, he built tracks, interestingly, called velodromes. This is a wooden track. This one happens to be in East Hartford. And they would race bikes competitively and give large cash awards as valuable prizes. As some of you know, there is a move afoot to create velodromes in the 21st century. And so what goes around comes around, I guess. Pope got bicyclists to meet each other socially by setting up clubs, such as this women's club. Well, I'm not going to take time to correct that. This women's club posing near the Memorial Arch in Bushnell Park. And his colorful annual catalog, the Vogue magazine of its day, proved that then, as now, sex sells. Using the loveliest models riding velocipedes, and you see this woman gazing lovingly into her boyfriend's eyes. She, you'll notice, was taking the safe side of a model that didn't involve a 5-foot fall. And Pope broadened his market by inventing offshoots, such as this tricycle, anything to widen his audience and his market. And he also was great on competition, setting world records in speed and distance here and all across the country. But a large drawback for the Colonel was safety and the risk of another's bikers being injured in falls. Soon, a British-made model came on the market, wisely called a safety bicycle. He even adapted this one to, again, widening the market, to become a motorcycle, always on the lookout. However, women weren't entirely sold on the safety bicycle because, as you can see, the long skirts of the day tended to get caught in the bicycle chains. And so the Columbia Bicycle Company installed a cover over the gearbox, which did the trick. But just like the Weed Sewing Machine Company in the 1870s, Colonel Pope had become a victim of his own success. And as the market became saturated, it led him to seek new fields to conquer. And he found them in Europe, where manufacturers named Daimler, Benz, Peugeot had harnessed a simple gasoline engine to a bicycle frame and called it an automobile. Soon Pope hired a veritable genius, a 26-year-old engineer named Hiram Percy Maxim, in the same family which invented the Maxim silencer. And Percy had graduated MIT at age 17. And he asked Percy to head his automobile division in 1895. Now, Maxim believed that the future belonged to gasoline-powered cars, whose engine sat beneath the driver's seat, although his new boss, Pope, strongly disagreed, noting that gas-powered cars ran on internal combustion Pope asked, why would anyone willingly sit on top of an explosion? Instead, he favored electric cars. Boy, if he were here today. But his biggest stumbling block was that the electric vehicle's 1,200-pound batteries had to be hoisted with a crane out of the car at the end of each day in order to charge them. He let Percy Maxim make a few gasoline vehicles because he wanted to keep this genius on his staff, but he concentrated on the sale of electric vehicles. Now, while Henry Ford was famous for building only one type of car, the Model T in the color black, Colonel Pope was way ahead of his time in building 3 models of electric cars: a compact car, the Pope Tribune, the mid-sized Pope Hartford pictured here. Does that look like a mid-sized car as we know it? Not quite. And even larger, the luxury Pope Toledo, which was made in, yes, Toledo, Ohio. Gradually, gasoline cars such as Henry Ford's, made largely in the Midwest, took over the market, leaving electric cars in their dust. When the Colonel died in 1909, his son, Albert Jr., took the reins of the Pope Manufacturing Company, which dissolved in 1914. An interesting postscript: the Columbia Bicycle Company still exists. It's in Westfield, Mass., and makes only one model of bicycle, an exhibition vehicle with a single gear, wide tires, and which is painted in 8 colors. It retails for $800. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn this back to Diane or Rebecca, and I thank you all for your attentiveness. I have passed these copies of the Pope book around while I've been speaking, and after the program, they will be on sale in the bookshop. They're all autographed, and there's nothing better, in my opinion, for a gift than a book that is personally inscribed to the recipient by the author. So I encourage you to meet, buy, chat afterwards. So thank you so much for coming. It's a nice crowd. And
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to be moving our set a little bit, and so while we're doing that, I just wanted to bring your attention that, and not all chairs had this on the seat, so if you didn't, stop by the back and we'll give one to you. But we did put a survey out, and we really appreciate your feedback about our program, so I would ask you to please fill out the survey. And also there's a postcard about Envision Fest, which, as I mentioned earlier, is coming up on Saturday. Tons of stuff to do, all free. And we also have some information about our farmers market and concert series, along with some information about a couple of the organizations that our panelists work for. So we'll learn more about their nonprofits as we go on. Thank you so much.
Rebecca, thank you. Joining us now for our panel discussion is Kelly Kennedy. Kelly is the Executive Director of BikeWalk Connecticut, an advocacy organization that seeks to get policies and practices implemented in the state, at the state level, that make Connecticut a better place to bike and to walk. Kelly is a graduate of the UConn School of Law and of Penn State University, where she studied exercise science. Also joining us is Aidan Charles, the founder and Executive Director of, is it CCAP?
Connecticut Cycling Advancement Program.
Right, the Connecticut Cycling Advancement Program. I was trying to get a little acronym there. Can I call it CCAP? No? Okay. Anyway, I will. Aidan raced throughout the country and internationally as both a junior and a professional cyclist. He went on to study at the University of Mary Washington, where he earned a BS in biology with concentrations in nutrition and exercise physiology. And Aidan has been helping endurance athletes achieve their goals since 2006 in his consulting practice. I'd also like to open this up. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. I'll call on you, and someone will bring a mic over. We need to use the microphone because we're recording this for CTN. But let's start getting into this. Aidan, just tell us a little bit about the mission of the Connecticut Cycling Advancement Program.
Our mission is to really give kids and their families and people all over the state access to the sport of cycling, to get them engaged and to help them realize that the sport of cycling is just as rewarding, if not more so, than any of these other major sort of mainstream sports. So for us, this is our major goal, is to sort of change the hearts and minds of a lot of people in the state to support and to get engaged in the sport.
Okay. And Kelly, tell us a little bit about what your organization does.
BikeWalk Connecticut works to make Connecticut a better place to bike and walk for kids, for seniors, for everybody in between. Not just for recreational purposes, but as a means of transportation, too.
Okay. Aidan, I want you to talk a little bit about the big event that's going on here this weekend so that everybody has a chance to be involved in this if they'd like at least cheering, if not participating. So tell us what's happening on Saturday and Sunday.
On Saturday and Sunday, we have the Connecticut Cycling Festival coming to downtown Hartford. So this is actually a pretty rare event. We have some of the country's best cyclists, competitive cyclists, coming to downtown Hartford to duke it out on our downtown streets. So if you want to come out and just watch, or if you'd like to get engaged and participate in our Grand Final that happens on Saturday, or just come out and eat a lot of great food, because there's going to be a whole food and beverage expo and a lot of great sort of special events and shows. It's a great event for the entire family, and we welcome everybody to join.
All right, you skipped over a term that I had never heard before, I have to admit, until I looked it up, a Grand Fondo. What is that? It sounds like fun, but what is it?
It's really just like a big, fun ride, right? Where instead of a sort of a race that you have to qualify to get into, or have a certain level of license, racing license, right, to get into, you can actually just come out, kind of like the Hartford Marathon, and start in this one big group. And you get placed based off of your age bracket in a way. And you'll compete, if you'd like to, on certain timed sections that are on the course. Or if you just like to finish, then you can just finish the course and enjoy the beautiful views. This course will actually go all the way down to Old Saybrook and back up if you'd like to go that far.
Wow.
You don't have to. But there's a 45-mile option and a 100-mile
Okay,
option.
and I think when the cyclists come back at their own pace, there's a barbecue especially for them, so that sounds like it would be fun.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit, Steve, about some of the things that Albert did, that the Colonel did, because he not only came up with a device that a lot of people here hadn't seen before he started manufacturing them, but then he came up with the idea that I better teach people how to ride these. Then he came up with the idea that I better have a place for people to perform on these, a velodrome, in other words, so that they could race or compete. And then we better have better roads so that everybody can ride them and use this as transportation. This guy had the whole package, didn't he?
He was always looking a step ahead, Diane. And so an ordinary manufacturer might say, well, I'm going to turn out this bicycle. Here it is. Gee, why is nobody buying it? And he said, what do you have to do in order for people to buy my product? Well, you have to have paved roads and so forth, and that was really one of the secrets of his success, particularly when he got to the automobile era and linking every county seat in the nation with paved roads. You can imagine what that did to sales.
Yeah. Aidan, as someone who has competed professionally, Steve mentioned that modern-day velodromes are coming back. What do you know about that?
Well, there's a lot of great groups making a big push to bring the velodrome back. I mean, velodrome was, actually cycling was one of the most popular sports of its day at the turn of the century. So for actually the Madison Square Garden, as another historical fact, Madison is actually the name of a bike race. That was originally a track, believe it or not. So for a lot of these groups, whether it's in New York, Hartford here, actually there's another group in New Haven, are making pushes to bring back a velodrome.
How different a kind of cycling is that from what we're accustomed to seeing on, many of us just see it on television, and we usually are watching it in Europe, but how different is a velodrome style of a competition?
It's very fast-paced. It's very exciting to watch. It's like watching a track race or a dog race, or maybe NASCAR, I guess you could say. So races will last anywhere from a few seconds to a couple of minutes. But it's a way that you can really sort of, well, actually in Europe, it's incredibly popular to bet on these sports. But for these guys, this is a very, very fun way to get a lot of rapid fire races in a lot of different formats. Like I said, Madison was just one format of a track race.
It sounds like it might take off here. It sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's a lot
It
of fun.
sounds like a good spectator sport. And if you can bet on it, what could be wrong with that? We like that in this state. If anybody has questions, please wave your hand at me so that I'll see you, and we'll have somebody come up with a mic. But we're happy to answer any of your questions. Yeah, right over here, Bill, we have the gentleman here in a blue jacket.
Will make regular two-wheel bicycles?
Two-
Level,
can You mean the conventional bicycles you
Yes.
see today? Yeah, that was the safety bicycle.
yes.
And if you look at it up close, it's remarkably similar to the basic bicycle for sale today, and as dissimilar as the high wheeler. But no, it didn't have but one gear, and so and in fact, they didn't get into multi-gear bicycles in a big way until after his demise. But yes, he sold more two-wheel bicycles than high wheelers in the final analysis.
Kelly, tell me a little bit about, do we know what percentage of people in this state actually bike to work? I have a lot of my relatives live in Europe, and even my sister in Paris bikes to work. And it's, not exactly bike friendly, I don't think, in Paris when you're competing with all the traffic on the roads. So how many people are actually trying to do that here?
I'm glad you asked, and this is something that I refreshed myself on this morning. The U.S. Census came out with some numbers recently, I think it was around May of this year, which happens to be Bike Month. And although nationwide there was a big increase in bike commuting, I think some 60% over a decade, Connecticut's increase is half that. So the League of American Bicyclists has done a study from 2005 to 2012. Our percentage has increased just 25%, but you asked how many people are actually bike commuting. According to these numbers, 0.33%. Now compare that to places that are really bike friendly and have good bike cultures like Davis, California, which has 19.8% of their people commuting by bike. In Portland, Oregon, it's like 6%. So we could do better.
What would it take?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked too. It takes a bottom up and a top down approach. So when I say bottom up, the people in Connecticut need to clamor for it and need to want it and need to make clear to their elected officials that this is something that we are serious about, changing the culture in Connecticut. And then you need that leadership at the top, at the state level and at the local level to say, we hear you, we believe you, we get it. There's so many good reasons to bring bike culture back to Connecticut.
And I know that one of the things that your organization does is that you rate which towns are bike friendly and which are not. What makes a town bike friendly? When you're doing your rating, what puts somebody at the top or at the bottom?
This was a first of its kind exercise, and no other state has done this. And we looked at a couple different perspectives. So we took public opinion to see what people thought about how safe and convenient it is to bike and walk in their town. whether there are bike lanes, how respectful the drivers are, were part of it, whether there's sidewalks, whether there's connectivity between the roads and the sidewalks and the bike lanes. And then we also, so that was one dimension, we looked at public opinion, and then the other dimension was, what are the towns doing? Do they have a bike and pedestrian plan? Do they have a complete streets policy? Do they have a bike and pedestrian task force where they engage the community? And have they done any outreach to their citizens on those things? So those are the factors that we looked at.
Well, if we're going to get the towns to be more bike friendly, we need more bike riders, and we'll get to that in a minute, but we have one question right over here. Bill, if you can bring the microphone up.
Getting back to Colonel Pope, it's once said that Henry Ford remarked that he wanted to make a motor car for the multitudes. And he did this by using innovative manufacturing techniques, the assembly line, among other things. I'm wondering if Colonel Pope adopted similarly innovative manufacturing techniques to bring the cost of bicycles down, then bring the cost of the electric automobile down.
He did. And he was on the lookout for, he was happy to pirate any technique that any competing manufacturer used. And as a result, the price of the high wheeler, for instance, which was $300 when it began, fell to less than $150 while they were still making them. And then he applied the same cost-cutting techniques to the safety bike, because by that time there was a lot of competition, and if he didn't, he would have lost market share.
Steve, why Hartford? Why did he select Hartford as his location?
Well, it's a good question, Diane. People say, well, gee, wasn't he born in Boston? Didn't he grow up in Boston? Yes. And all his family lived in Boston. In fact, he had a wife and 6 children, and he kept his corporate office in Boston, but the factory was down here, run by others, and he would come down on weekends by train and work like the devil for 2 days, and then go back to Boston, kiss his wife goodbye, and come back for the rest. But yeah, it was largely the technical aspects, the tool and die making. You just didn't have that. I found it remarkable when I was doing research for the book that he could go from Maine to Florida and visit tens of cities larger than Hartford and still not find one that had everything he needed.
So it really was a skilled workforce, which is part of what we are trying to sell ourselves as today.
Yes, that, and largely the tool and die equipment refinements that were done by Samuel Colt, right over here near the river. And so he borrowed on those extensively, really before anyone else had gotten to them.
Aidan, we were talking about making towns more bike-friendly, talking about biking to work, but the first thing that you have to do, I guess, is get more people on bicycles, and that's one of the things that your organization does as well.
Absolutely. And, to agree with Kelly, I think that if we're going to get people rallied around some thought process of making everything more cycling friendly or commuter friendly, get your kids on bikes, and you can be guaranteed that people will vote for bike paths, and they'll make sure that their voice is heard, right? If we have a cycling club or a cycling event in every school, in every town, I think that will definitely happen. And
you have worked on implementing biking programs at different levels in schools.
Yep. absolutely. We have a high school cycling league that started with over 21 schools engaged in that league now. But we also have Parks and Rec department programs as well. So there are Parks and Rec cycling team or clubs, and there are also high school clubs. Yep.
Right over here. Let's bring the mic over.
Okay, hi. Back to the subject of bike-friendly communities. There's been a grant from Simsbury, and we're rated #1 in the state, and they just applied for silver level. And they're working diligently in all these areas, as well as an awareness of the history of bicycles at past, present, and future. We have an exhibit, for example, at the Simsbury Historical Society currently right now on that topic. What are other towns? I mean, how is the movement going overall in the different towns within the state?
Are you asking me? Yeah. That's great that you got to put a plug in for Simsbury, and I think, and it's well deserved too. And I think what you have in Simsbury is the top down and the bottom up working together collaboratively, and things happen where people get involved. And I think, actually, when I was in Simsbury last weekend, I saw a lot of people out on bikes, and it felt to me almost as if it was expected. If you're coming to Simsbury, you better be bike friendly. That's the feeling that I got going through there. And I think Simsbury is a good role model. So we are seeing people get involved at different levels in different ways, whether they are in rural communities or suburban communities. But I think the message is starting to resonate. However, when I was just at the Transportation Forum yesterday with the gubernatorial candidates, there was nothing said about biking and walking as part of our transportation plan. So yes, we have work to do. We're making some strides on the local levels, but we've got to raise the standards at the state level.
Kelly, what is the Complete Streets bill?
Oh, well, it's not just a bill, it's a law now. And what that says is anytime the state or a city or town does anything with a road, if it's got money to do that, which is, a prerequisite, it has to take into consideration all users. It has to take into consideration pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users. And not only does the planning need to take all users into consideration, there's a 1% minimum that the towns are supposed to spend on making things bike and walk and transit friendly.
So would that be adding bike lanes, things like that?
Yep, sharrows, sidewalks, curb cuts, ramps for wheelchair users. So we have the law on the books, and now it's time to start enforcing that. It is not an optional law, it's a mandatory law. So part of our work is to raise awareness and get the citizens in the towns to make this an important issue in their towns.
We have a question over here. Just wait 1 minute while we bring you the microphone, okay? Thank you.
Is there anything in that law about maintaining, the bike paths or whatever they end up doing for the complete streets? Because, we have bike paths on Capitol Ave, right past Colonel Pope's factory, but, they're always full of glass and sand and the lane, the paint gets worn away and nobody seems to take care of it.
I think operating is part of maintaining the roads. So yes, operating costs are always a challenge. There's your capital expenses. Building it is one thing. Maintaining it is another thing. So we need to make sure that we are doing that.
Right over here. Just wait till we bring you the microphone. Phil, the gentleman in the back, and then this gentleman up here.
On the same subject, what if it's 1%, supposedly mandatory, of DOT road spending? How much is actually being spent on other modes of transportation, aside from the car, which is maybe getting 99%?
I can't answer that. Specifically, I know that it's not as high as we would like it to be. We are putting money into bike paths as a state, but it gets very complicated. Transportation funding is very complicated as to how the money comes from the federal government, how the state uses it, how the state is transparent or not about its spending, and then how that money gets divvied up among the municipalities is a big job. And our organization tries to shine a light on those things, but there are a number of transportation advocates working together to shine a light on transparency and metrics and how much of our spending really is going into complete streets and bike ped amenities.
And in fact, the gubernatorial candidates, although they didn't mention anything at that forum, they differ on what transportation needs the state has. While Governor Malloy is talking about putting more money into mass transit, Tom Foley has said, let's increase the capacity in I-95. We're not going to push people out of their cars. So, both men come from Lower Fairfield County, so they know what traffic is like on I-95, and they have different solutions for that. This gentleman right here.
Hi, I've got a question for the person from BikeWalk, and the question I have is how you're talking about a bottom-up, top-down emphasis on safety, bicycling safety, pedestrian safety. We have the vulnerable users law on the books right now, but it's being enforced very selectively. How do we compel localities to enforce the law when accidents occur, like Mr. Hughes up on Route 189? How do we compel localities to enforce those laws when they're not being enforced?
And Kelly, would you first explain what the vulnerable user law is?
Right. The vulnerable user law was enacted this year and signed into law in May, enacted in the 2014 legislature. It took 5 years of BikeWalk Connecticut work to get that enacted. So that is one of the roles that we play. To be fair, it is a new law, but that's not an excuse. We need to educate and find a way to work with law enforcement.
And what is it again?
I'm sorry. The vulnerable user bill means that if a driver, a motorist is reckless and injures or kills a cyclist or a pedestrian or any kind of vulnerable user, which means anybody who's legitimately using the road and not in a vehicle. It could be a skateboarder, could be a wheelchair user. The reckless driver must be fined, but the fine is capped at $1,000. So it is an educational issue. We need to get to law enforcement, and that takes time and a process, but we are trying to raise awareness. I've been asked to send a letter to the New Milford police because there was a fatality in New Milford, and so that's the kind of thing that BikeWalk Connecticut is doing. It's an education process.
Aidan, I wanted to ask you about what would it take, do you think, to make cycling as popular here in the United States as it is in Europe?
I really do think it's an exposure. It's an education thing. This is really just a matter of making sure that kids and their families know that they have access to the sport and that it is accepted and it's supported. For us, when we go into a school, we host clinics or rides or these sort of virtual races that we do with some of our facilities. These kids are so drawn to a bicycle and so thrilled just to race against each other and to have a good time and to be together as part of a team or community with this. It's a no-brainer. They just need to know that they have the option.
Has the whole scandal with Lance Armstrong and the doping scandals, has that hurt cycling here or in Europe?
I think it's, at first, it definitely tainted the impression of what, the high level of the sport is. But at what we're talking about at this level, it's not I don't think it's a detriment to what we're doing at all. I think most people understand there's an incredible amount of benefits and things and rewards that it can provide to some youth and young adults that, once you get into the super high level of sport, that's another argument to be made. But for the most part, the benefits greatly outweigh the consequences or the potential drawbacks.
What level of competitors are we expecting here this weekend for the Cycling Fest?
We are expecting probably 10 out of the top 20 competitive cyclists in the country. Mm-hmm. So they'll be racing actually in a format that's super spectator friendly, kind of like a track race like we talked about before. It's actually going to be on a 0.8 mile circuit with 8 corners on that 0.8 mile circuit right here in downtown. So you can come out and watch these guys go around almost like a NASCAR race. As announcers give you the play-by-play. It'll also be televised on CPTV. So it'll be a really great way to sort of get exposed to the sport, have a lot of fun, spend time with family, and get outside.
Sounds great. Should be good weather for it too. It should be nice. Any further questions? We have one here and one there.
Kelly, has there been any research or data collected on what people say would help them or encourage them to get out on a bicycle?
Yeah, it is a chicken and an egg thing. We say people will not get on bikes until they feel like it's safe, until they feel like the roads are safe, that the drivers are respectful of bikes and pedestrians, but we need the infrastructure too. So they need to feel safe.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that's part of the research that you've done about why people aren't using bikes as much as they might.
Right.
I think we had another question right here, Bill.
2 questions, really. Aidan, I was wondering which bike group is interested in the velodrome? I'm interested in that, 1. And 2, as far as bike-friendly streets, I'm in a bunch of trail groups and stuff. And what groups are interested in improving downtown Hartford's streets for bike access?
Aidan, do you want to start?
I'd have to, honestly, I know a couple of people who are in that group, although I'm not familiar with the exact title, but I'd be happy to pass their names along. Dwight Johnson and Sue D'Aniello down in, I think they're down in New Haven and the Amity area are helping head that up, and they're making some great progress.
And I think the second part of the question is for you, Kelly.
Right, for Hartford. There is a group that is starting to percolate. I'm not sure it has a formal name yet, but we can connect after we break down here, and I'll get your name. But I also want to point out that the city of Hartford has a very amenable planning director in Tom Deller and the planning staff, and so there is a lot of work going on in engaging planners and engineers to make the parks better connected and the streets better, more friendly for cyclists. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of work underway at the municipal level. It's not broadcast, but until now.
We have time for one more question. If someone okay, would you bring the microphone over here?
2 things I'd like to bring out. Number 1, I take the bus a lot, and over the past couple of years, I have seen a lot of people using the bus racks for bicycles. On the front of the buses, there are bicycle racks, and people are really using them. Secondly, on the Connecticut Fast Track routes, I believe there are bicycle trails along that route. So that's a lot of good traffic-free bicycle routes that will be available when the fast track goes into operation, I believe.
I wasn't aware of that. Kelly, are you aware of that?
Yeah, I was lucky to be invited on a tour while things were, it's still under construction, but a good part of the busway, I'll still refer to it as the busway, is well underway. Bike racks are being installed at every station, so the idea is for people to be able to bring their bikes on board and be able to make the first mile and the last mile by bike. But there is also a bike path alongside the busway for about half, for about 5 miles. Mm-hmm. And I think it is going to be wildly, wildly popular. I know there are very complex reasons why that bike path couldn't be extended the full way, but I think pressure will build to expand it. But I think it's going to be hugely popular.
That's good to hear. Steve, I have one last question for you, and that is, are you working on another book? And if so, what?
I'm pouring my time into something called historywire.com, a whole different medium. And that largely involves book reviews of first edition history. And there's also an internet bookstore connected with that too. And then my day job is still practicing law. I just, before we leave that, we're talking about bike paths. Got one very short anecdote by Colonel Pope. He was very solicitous of his workers, built them houses, libraries, so forth. But he had a young man come to him once who was just head over heels in love with a beautiful gal who lived out in in New Britain, nearby. And but he had no way to get there because the roads were all rocky and ruts, and he couldn't afford the train and so forth. And so he asked the Colonel Pope what he should do. Colonel Pope said, "Tell you what, I will build a bicycle path for you from Hartford to New Britain. And I'm going to figure out what it'll cost and amortize that, and I will take $11 a week or whatever it was from your pay for so many months until that's paid. I don't want you to lose that gal."
Well, I think that's a great way to end our show. Not only love of bicycling, but love of that gal at the other end of the bike path. Thank you all for being with us today, and thank you all for being with us today. I hope that you'll enjoy Cycling Fest this weekend.